الحمد لله سبحانه وتعالى هذه الليلة المباركة على تفاقم هذه الحقائق من العلوم والأعمال والقرب من الله سبحانه وتعالى.
Praise Allah, thanks and gratitude given, stellar gathering us together this blessed, auspicious night, discussing, learning about the
ونحن خلال هذه الحلقة نأخذ نصيبنا من تلقي الرحمات الإلهية والبركات الربانية والمولى سبحانه وتعالى في مجالس الذكر والعلم والخير.
Throughout the process of this mutual exchange, we seek closeness from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, particularly when we explore deeper meanings of the importance of seeking sacred knowledge and the way to obtain it.
فلله الرحمات والنفحات في مجالس العلم والذكر يفتح هذه العبادة ويتقرب بها.
Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, by the virtue of gatherings of sacred knowledge, causes these great openings and these spiritual breezes of divine compassion to permeate when we actively engage in this.
ويصلح بها أحوالهم ويوجههم بها من درجات القرب من الله سبحانه وتعالى وحتى يعافي بها أبدانهم من الأمراض الظاهرة المخصوصة. وقد كان كثير من أهل الصلاح يذهبون إلى مجالس العلم بنية الشفاء من الأمراض الباطنة والظاهرة لعظمة ما يفتحه الله سبحانه وتعالى في مجالس علم النبي محمد صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم من الرحمات والخيرات والابتداءات الإلهية بالخير.
So by virtue of this active exposure to the unseen and undisclosed outpourings and exhalations of rahmah, of divine compassion, which can be taken and experienced through the attendance of gatherings of sacred knowledge, this is a means for healing, this is a remedy, not only for spiritual diseases, but also for diseases of one's physical body. Al-Ḥabīb Kāẓim then said that many people throughout the history of the Ummah recognize this, affirm this, and were they to become sick or ill, they would actually seek a physical well-being and remedy by actively attending the gatherings of sacred knowledge.
أعظم معجزة لرسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم هو القرآن الكريم الخالد الباقي إلى يوم الدين، والذي استنبط منه العلماء المفاهيم والعلوم وجميع الحقائق الإيمانية والعلمية أخذوها من معاني كلام الله تعالى من كلام النبي المصطفى محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم.
He then said that the most magnificent expression, the greatest miracle that came through the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam was the revelation of the Quran to his blessed heart. Through this and throughout the annals of time, that the great scholars and those that have been readied and prepared to understand these deeper knowledges have been able to extrapolate and derive all of these incredible knowledges from its source.
المذاهب الأربعة جاءت من اختلاف مفاهيم الأئمة في النصوص القرآنية وفي المرادات الربانية، ما هو مراد الحق عز وجل من معنى هذه الآية، فاختلفت مفاهيم الأئمة الأربعة، فجاءت المذاهب الأربعة الباقية ليومنا هذا الصحيحة الموصلة إلى الجنة، الموصلة إلى رضا الله سبحانه وتعالى لمن عمل بها ولمن قام بها.
What's known throughout the history of the Ummah is that the four authentic schools of scholastic interpretation, the madhahib or the madhab, these are extrapolated from the very sources of Islam, from the Quran, the word of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and the teachings, the words, the sayings of the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. All of these have been preserved and have been passed on in order to preserve this authentic channel back to experiencing the divine presence.
أيضا جميع مذاهب الأئمة المجتهدين رضي الله تعالى عنهم من عمل بها ومن قام بها وقلد إماما مجتهدا أوصلته إلى رضا الله سبحانه وتعالى التي علامة عليها دخول الجنة، أوصلته إلى القرب من الله سبحانه وتعالى والولاية والمعرفة والمحبة، كما نرى في المذاهب الأربعة كثير من الأولياء في جميع المذاهب الأربعة لأن عباداتهم صحيحة على وفق ما شرع الله سبحانه وتعالى وعلى وفق ما فهمه إمامهم في تلك المسألة.
So based upon this premise, we see throughout the entire history of the Ummah that there were scholars and people that followed those scholars and people that took scholarship within the limited capacity of each particular method. All of them reached a place with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and literally arrived at the divine presence by virtue of their worship being sound, being valid, because they followed this correct interpretational channel known as the madhab, which goes in an unbroken chain narration back to the Prophet Muhammad.
وندلل على قولنا أن المذاهب إنما جاءت من اختلاف الأئمة في فهم مراد الله سبحانه وتعالى أو في فهم النص من كتاب الله عز وجل. ما هو المراد من هذا النص؟
And we just wanted to pay particular attention to what we're saying about the meanings of the four madahib are these four channels, these four schools of scholastic interpretation. That just to go into this a bit further, what do we mean that they extrapolated the essence and the meanings from the sources, the Quran and the Sunnah?
في مثل قوله سبحانه وتعالى وفي مثل قوله جل جلاله وتعالى في آية الوضوء يا أيها الذين آمنوا إذا قمتم إلى الصلاة فاغسلوا وجوهكم وأيديكم إلى المرافق وامسحوا برؤوسكم. فالباء هذه اختلف العلماء في فهم معناها، هل هي للتبعيض أو هي زائدة أو هي للألصاق، فتأتي الحرف في اللغة العربية على عدة معاني. فالباء في هذه الكلمة لها عدة معاني. من اختلاف معنى الباء جاء اختلاف الأئمة الأربعة فيما هو المراد بمعنى قوله عز وجل برؤوسكم، هل هو للتبعيض أما الباء تكون زائدة المعنى وينطق بها لفظا وكتابة، وهو المراد وامسحوا رؤوسكم كما يقول سيدنا الإمام مالك رضي الله عنه، أو كما يقول سيدنا الإمام أبو حنيفة أن الباء للتبعيض امسحوا برؤوسكم أو بعض رؤوسكم، أو كما يقول بعض الأئمة أن المراد امسحوا رؤوسكم وأن المعنى زايد في هذه الآية العظيمة.
One excellent example of this myriad interpretation that can take place in each of them as sound and each of them are authentic is that we can find in the verse of the Quran where Allah explains to us the manner by which we're to perform the ritual ablution that we do. So after we're taught the various limbs, it comes to the very point where it mentions about wiping over the head, and the particle used in Arabic is joined also to wiping over the feet. Now the nature of the Arabic language is there are multiple meanings to this particle, and for that reason it gives this ability for a multitude of various interpretations. When we say wiping over the head, scholars vary in their interpretation of what is actually stipulated as an obligation, what is fard and what is wajib. If you look within the scholars amongst the Shafi'i jurists, then it's only an obligation to wipe over a small part or portion of the actual head itself, and so on and so forth. These varying interpretational rulings came, but it's all derived from the beauty and the ability to have this directly from the Quran.
وكما في قوله سبحانه وتعالى في آية الحج وأتموا الحج والعمرة لله، اختلفت مفاهيم العلماء في ما هو المراد بالإتمام. ومعلوم أن الإتمام أي الكمال، أتموا الحج والعمرة يأتوا بهما تامتين غير ناقصتين، لكن ما هو التمام؟ فاختلفت مفاهيم العلماء في فهم يعني مراد العبد عز وجل أو النص من هذا الفهم، المراد من هذا النص القرآني في الإتمام. فقال كالشافعية مثلا عندنا المراد بالإتمام الحج والعمرة أي أن يعتمر في نفس العام الذي يحج فيه، فهذا إتمام الحج وأن يأتي بهما تامتين أي غير ناقصتين، لا العمرة ناقصة ولا الحج كذلك ناقص. وكذلك الأئمة الآخرون كأبي حنيفة وغيرهم فاختلفت مفاهيمهم في فهم هذا النص، فجاءت المذاهب الأربعة من اختلاف مفاهيم الأئمة في كلام الله تعالى وفي كلام النبي محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم.
The pertinent example is the verse in the Quran which talks about the completion, the itmam of the Hajj, of the greater pilgrimage, and the Umrah, the lesser pilgrimage. This word, the scholars had a scholastic interpretational difference in the actual implications to what this itmam, the actual completion, is one way of rendering it into the English language, what it ultimately meant, and they differed in this regard from amongst the Shafi'i jurists. Some of them, they would talk about the nature it needs to be completed within a particular time frame of each other. Some of them, they talk in a more general sense that its completion means it can't have any discrepancy or you can't be missing elements of how those components will also discuss what they could be. The purpose here is to show the nature of the Quranic words and how it carries the capacity for this multitude of interpretation.
واختلاف المفاهيم في كتاب الله سبحانه وتعالى فيما يحتمل الاختلاف. أما النصوص التي لا تحتمل الاختلاف فنجد الإجماع فيها بين أئمة العلم وبين المذاهب الأربعة بالخصوص قاطبة، مثل آيات النكاح أو أغلب آيات النكاح وأغلب آيات المواريث. الاختلاف فيها إنما يكون طفيفا لوضوح الدلالة فيها، مثل قوله سبحانه وتعالى للذكر مثل حظ الأنثيين فإن كن نساء فوق 2 فلهن الثلث ما ترك. فالنصوص واضحة والمراد واضح، فلا يقع الاختلاف في فهم هذه النصوص بين الأئمة رحمهم الله.
Similarly, it's important to note at this juncture that there are verses similarly in the Quran which have no interpretational scope whatsoever. They're incredibly clear and definitive. And that's typically around certain things. For example, Habib gave the example of marriage, and also in terms of inheritance. There's a meticulous affirmation of what's permissible and what's not, and it leaves very little room. So for this very reason, within the authorized interpretive schools, you don't find much difference within these particular subjects.
وكذلك يعني لا نطيل بذكر هذه التفريعات في اختلاف الأئمة، لكن المراد أن المذاهب جاءت من اختلاف الأئمة في فهم كلام الله سبحانه وتعالى وكلام النبي محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم.
So we don't mention too extensively and focus on the nature of the difference within the 4 valid interpretational schools. We really focus here on the principle that this is actually a form of compassion which was allowed or authorized within the Ummah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So we're able to truly understand the vast breadth of the words of Allah and the words of His messengers.
الصحابة الكرام يعني في حياة النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم اختلفوا في فهم كلام النبي محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم.
Habib then pointed out that there's no real worry or concern that this is actually the case, that we do have a difference of opinion. Rather, this is something emphasized, and we see it that took place within the life of the blessed companions that lived around the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Not only did this occur, but the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam affirmed this difference amongst them.
مثل قوله صلى الله عليه وسلم من كان يؤمن بالله واليوم الآخر فلا يصلي أن العصر التي بني بريرة. فاختلفت أفهام الصحابة، هل المراد تحقيق هذا الأمر أنهم لا يصلون العصر التي بني بريرة، أو المراد الإسراع في هذا الأمر أي أنهم يباشرون وليس المراد أن يصلون العصر لبني بريرة حتى وإن أدى إلى خروج وقت العصر.
We find one example of this in the hadith where the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam commanded his companions radiallahu anhum that not one of you pray the Asr prayer until you reach Bani Qurayza, which is one of the names of the tribes. So the Sahaba had a valid difference of opinion, whereby they said was the implication of the Prophet's injunction here that absolutely we are only to pray the Asr prayer upon reaching this, or was it rather more of a subtle encouragement that we should hasten in making sure that we arrive before the Asr prayer ends?
وكذلك جاء الاختلاف بين الأئمة المذاهب الأربعة بسبب يعني كلام النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم أو بسبب تعدد الروايات في كلام النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم، فهذا أخذ بهذه الرواية وهذا أخذ بهذه الرواية.
There's also another scholastic process where we have a myriad of different narrations that some of them may seemingly maybe appear more strong or more valid to particular scholars for various reasons. For that reason, it affects the ruling in which they founded this interpretation.
حركة الحرف في آخر الكلمة العربية يغير المعنى، فمثل قوله صلى الله عليه وسلم زكاة الجنين زكاة أمه، أو زكاة الجنين زكاة أمه، كما أخذ سيدنا الإمام أبي حنيفة رضي الله عنه برواية النصب زكاة الجنين زكاة أمه، وأخذ إمامنا الشافعي برواية الرفع زكاة الجنين زكاة أمه. ويترتب على هذا الفهم الحكم الشرعي، كيف إذا وجدنا يعني جنينا في بطن الشاة أو في بطن الحيوان المأكول، فهل نزكيه بعد ذلك أم أن زكاة أمه تكفي عن تزكية ذلك؟ فجاءت اختلاف النصوص بسبب كلام النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم، قال زكاة الجنين زكاة أمه أو زكاة الجنين زكاة أمه. فإذا المذاهب جاءت من اختلاف الأئمة في فهم كلام الله، في فهم كلام الرسول صلى الله عليه وسلم، وكلهم على صواب وعلى طريق يوصل إلى الله عز وجل وعلى طريق يدخل إلى جنة الله سبحانه وتعالى وإلى رحمة الله عز وجل.
Then also mentioned the vast expansiveness within the very Arabic language itself, that the inflection that takes place at the end of any particular word affects the very meaning of that word. And for this reason, there are different scholars that that understood it differently in the implications. One of the examples is in relation to the fetus that is in the womb of a particular any given animal, and the various rulings and legal implications in the sacred law, whether it was permissible for the sacrifice of the mother, whether you had to then go on to sacrifice that which was in the womb, and so on and so forth. There's a spectrum of interpretation, and this is, in this case, it's predicated upon the inflection and the interpretation in the Arabic language which takes place because of the inflection at the end of the word.
الإمام الشافعي رحمه الله تعالى سيدنا الإمام محمد بن إدريس الشافعي من أعظم هؤلاء الأئمة الأربعة وغير الأئمة الأربعة الذين أبدى الله سبحانه وتعالى علمه باقيا إلى يومنا هذا في كثير من الأقطار، والمسلمون في مشارق الأرض ومغاربها يدينون الله سبحانه وتعالى ويتعبدون الله جل جلاله على مفاهيم هذا الإمام وعلى قواعد هذا الإمام المستنبطة من كتاب الله تعالى وسنة رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم.
To mention the great Shafi'i, he was one of the greatest of the Imams, of the great scholars and jurists that this ummah has ever known, and he is one of the great amongst the four Imams, and also in general throughout and through this he left behind this interpretation school.
ومن غزارة علمه أنه ألف المذهبين، المذهب الأول القديم الذي عندما كان في العراق، والمذهب الثاني الجديد الذي عندما عاد إلى مصر فألف المذهب الجديد الذي يفتى به، والذي أعمال المسلمين الآن على مذهب الشافعي على هذا المذهب الجديد الذي صنفه في العراق.
One sign of the expansiveness of his knowledge was that he actually codified two schools of thought. One of them was known as the older school, and the other one is known as the latter or the newer school. One of them he codified whilst in the land of Iraq, and later on in the land of Egypt.
ومن غزارة علمه أنه كان يقول عندما وصلت إلى مصر كلمت الناس أو حدثت العلماء فلم يفهموا كلامي، فتنزلت لهم وتنزلت لهم وتنزلت لهم حتى فهموا كلامي. وهذا التنزل المعنوي أنه يخاطب الناس على قدر ما يفهمون وعلى قدر ما يعقلون، لا على قدر ما عندهم من العلوم ومن الفهوم في كتاب الله تعالى وسنة رسوله صلى الله عليه وسلم.
He then said another great sign of how expansive his knowledge really was that he said about himself that when I traveled from Iraq to Egypt, that I found that people just unable to comprehend anything I was saying. So when I spoke, I realized that I had to almost compromise and adjust the way I was speaking so they would be able to understand. I tried that, it didn't work, and I had to take it down a notch further and so on and so forth until the people were actually able to understand. Habib said this is also an expression of the character of the true scholars of Islam. It doesn't mean that they compromise in the understanding, but just that they're able to now resonate with the people that they're actually understanding whilst maintaining the very essence, the principle which they infer.
وخلال عمره هذا الذي نعتبره أو يعتبر قصير أنه عاش في هذه الحياة 54 سنة فقط، ولكن خلال 54 عاما هذه ما شاء الله قام بجليلات الأعمال وقام بالأمور الكبيرة جدا، وأعطاه الله سبحانه وتعالى من صغره يعني ذكاء مفرطا وصفاء باطن عظيم وعقل وافر ونور كبير. فبواسطة هذه المواهب التي أعطاه الله إياها سبحانه وتعالى فهم يعني نصوص الكتاب والسنة ودونها ونشرت بعد ذلك بعد، وأعطاه الله فوق ذلك إخلاص وصدق مع الله عز وجل.
Habib then said what's also notable about this great Imam is that he only graced the earth for 54 years. He passed away, which is relatively young, but within the space of this blessed lifetime that he was able to codify his vast expanse of knowledge, and he had great insight. And even this Habib mentioned that this took place right from an early age. It wasn't his entire lifetime was spent in the pursuit of seeking sacred knowledge.
وتربى يتيما، هذا يعطينا صورة من النساء ممكن يعني في حسن التربية والاهتمام بالأولاد أن ينشأ من تحت أيديهن أعاظم الرجال وأكابر العلماء وكمل الصالحين.
He then said it's also important to note that he was raised as an orphan, he was fatherless. And this is there's a subtle indication that we should extrapolate from this, especially to the mothers that maybe the children don't have fathers, that in order to raise these great beings, these great men, it doesn't necessitate the father has to be there, but the mother can do this because the likes of Imam Shafi'i, so it's a clear sign.
من أظن ذكائه يعني أنه القرآن عمره 7 سنوات، حفظ الموطأ لشيخ الإمام مالك رحمه الله وعمره 10 سنوات، وأدل شيوخه بالإفتاء وعمره 15 سنة، يعني في سن ال15 قد وصل إلى درجة الإفتاء، وهي درجة راقية يعني يعرفها أهل الإفتاء في العلوم الشرعية.
Some of the signs of his astute intellectual acumen was that he memorized the entire Quran by the age of 7. Then he later went on to memorize the entire compendium of hadith known as the Muwatta by the great Imam Malik by the age of 11 years. He didn't reach the age of 15 years, other than he was authorized to give religious edicts as a professional jurist within the tradition.
كانوا يعتبرون الإمام الشافعي رحمه الله تعالى حجة في اللغة العربية، إذا قال كلمة فهي حجة في اللغة العربية، وكان أعظم الناس حفظا لأشعار العرب المتقدمين في الجاهلية وفي الإسلام، فعنده عدة مواهب مكنته من صناعة هذا المذهب النوراني العظيم الباقي ليومنا هذا.
That scholars also consider Imam Shafi'i as a real kind of source of proof within the context of the Arabic language that were he to say such and such a thing or note something about something linguistically, that he is considered a reference referred to within the scope of the Arabic.
ومع علمه الرزيق كان عابدا، كذلك كان يقسم الليل 3 أقسام، ثلث للنوم وثلث للعلم وثلث لقراءة القرآن والتضرع للدعاء، كل ليلة كان كذلك.
We then said alongside this vast knowledge and his implementation of this knowledge, that he was a person of devotion, that he would split up the night, compartmentalize it into 3 parts. Some parts of it for sleep, parts of it for seeking sacred knowledge and practicing, and then parts of it for pure worship between him and Allah.
وكان في رمضان يقرأ 60 ختمة في رمضان، مع كثرة عباداته ونوافله وعلمه، فيقرأ ختمة بالليل وختمة بالنهار، يختم في كل رمضان 60 ختمة رحمه الله.
Within the month of Ramadan alone, he completed the recitation of the entire Quran 60 times. That was alongside all the other various expressions and acts of good deeds that you perform in the month of Ramadan alone.
وكان سخيا كذلك أيضا، والسخي حبيب الله سبحانه وتعالى، فكان ما يأتيه من المال ينفقه في سبيل الله.
He was also exceptionally generous human being, that anything that came to him, any kind of wealth or money, he would give out of his wealth. And Habib said that Safi, this person who's imbibed with this characteristic, is somebody that's dear to God.
وكان شجاعا أمارا بالمعروف نهاء عن المنكر، وكان مشهورا جدا بالرماية، حسن الرماية، حتى يقال في ترجمته أنه كان يكتب اسمه محمد بن إدريس الشافعي بالرماية بالقوس عندما يرمي القوس.
So he was also Habib Kāẓim. He also mentioned that Imam Shafi'i was an incredibly brave and courageous human being, that he didn't fear retribution. He would command to good, he would reprimand against that which was evil. Similarly, he was also a great marksman. He was a great archer, and it's even mentioned in some of the biographical references of the great Imam Shafi'i that he was so skilled and precise that he could actually spell out his name through the arrows, Muhammad ibn Idris al-Shafi'i, in a particular target.
وكان مخلصا مع الله سبحانه وتعالى، حتى كان إذا ناظر الخصوم يقول أتمنى أن يظهر الله الحق عز وجل على لساني أم على لسان خصمي، لا أبالي، المهم أن يظهر الله سبحانه وتعالى الحق. لذلك كان دائما الله سبحانه وتعالى يظهر الحق على لسانه وينصره من خلال مناظراته ومجادلاته مع العلماء الآخرين.
He was also somebody who was imbibed with deep sincerity and did some things which were solely for the sake of Allah. So one of the expressions of this, that he was known to say that whenever he would debate with somebody in a scholastic argument, that he would always hope and pray that Allah caused truth to manifest upon the tongue of his opponent and not through himself. And the purpose here was that the truth manifested. It wasn't necessarily through him, to completely efface that side of his ego, and he was somebody of deep sincerity.
وكان من ورعه إذا نظر أحد العلماء المخلصين أن يترك قوله ويعود إلى قول ذلك العالم، كما حصل مع سيدنا الإمام إسحاق بن راهويه رضي الله عنه.
He was also incredibly scrupulous in the matters of religion, so he would take on the position of other scholars were he to find latterly that they actually superseded that which the juristic conclusion that had come
أن
to.
الإمام الشافعي رضي الله عنه نظر الإمام إسحاق بن راهويه في مسألة دبغ الجلود هل تدبغ أو لا؟ وكان قول الإمام الشافعي الأول أن الجلود الحيوان إذا مات فلا ينتفع بجلده لا بدبغ ولا بغير ذلك. وكان قول الإمام إسحاق بن راهويه أنه ممكن أن ينتفع بجلد الميتة بالدبغ بعد ذلك. فعندما تناظرا رجع الإمام الشافعي إلى قول الإمام إسحاق بن راهويه، ورجع الإمام إسحاق بن راهويه إلى قول الإمام الشافعي. ومذهب الإمام الشافعي الآن المقرر في الكتب أن ننتفع بجلود الميتة بالدباغ.
One of the examples that's mentioned this in the biographical reference of Imam Shafi'i is that when he had a debate with the great Imam that he had the scholarly position that upon tanning the hide of a particular animal, it now became purified, meaning richly purified. It was no longer impure, and it could be utilized. Imam Shafi'i initially was of the opinion that this was not the case. However, when he discussed over the legal proofs and saw the implications to what the great Imam was alluding to, he left his prior opinion and he went with that position, and latterly this was adjusted in his work.
ولكنه يقول من الشعر قصائد غرام هي في دواء الباطن وفي علاج القلوب شيئا عظيما وكلها مأخوذة من بحور الكتاب والسنة.
He was also a profound poet, even though the majority of his time and effort was spent in service to sacred knowledge and preserving and codifying his school of thought. Nevertheless, he has some exquisite poetry which is derived from the deeper spiritual interpretations of the Quran, which talks about various kind of healing and how to rectify the heart and the ego to this.
كما يقول في قصته هذه الملآنة بالحكم دع الأيام تفعل ما تشاء وطب نفسا إذا حكم القضاء ولا تجزع لحديثة الليالي فما لحوادث الدنيا بقاء.
One of the examples of Sayyid Kāẓim mentioned in his poetry, the meaning of which is leave the days to follow their course, because in the transition of the night and the day is only that which manifests from ultimately the divine decree.
وكان مشهورا بحب آل بيت النبي محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم ويصرح بهذا في قصائده حتى اتهم بالرفض فقال إن كان حب آل أحمد رافضا فليشهد الثقلان أني رافض.
Al-Ḥabīb also mentioned that he was a deep lover of the prophetic household, and to such an extent, because he mentioned this often in his poetry, that people actually accused him, as you could say, as a form of Shiism, but he was Rafidi, so he kind of, and Imam Shafi'i, his response was simply that people accuse me of this, and if love of the family of the prophets is that, then I'm the greatest one of them. So his great biographical accolades are many and abundant, and there's just so much to really say about it.
الصالحين الأكابر الأولياء كمثل الإمام مالك وأبي حنيفة وسيدنا الإمام أحمد بن حنبل كلهم علماء أولياء ليسوا مجرد علماء فقط ولكنهم في مراتب باطنية وقربية من الحق سبحانه وتعالى.
We then said, may Allah allow us to therefore benefit from this great Imam Shafi'i, because they weren't just scholars, you could say, of the outward, but these people were awliya, they were saints, they were people whose hearts were deeply connected to Allah, and the likes of his teacher, the great Imam Malik. These are martaba, particular archetype of scholar that have deep spiritual realities and hierarchical degrees with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
وختاما يهنئ الطلبة والطالبات على توفيق الله سبحانه وتعالى لهم وشرح صدرهم بأخذ العلم النوراني هذا المتصل المسند المسلسل إلى رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم عن الشيوخ الذين عندهم والذين أخذوا عن شيوخ قبلهم.
We've then said, in conclusion, we'd like to congratulate and really show our happiness towards all of those people, both the brothers and sisters who made this active intention to embark upon the blessed and sacred search of sacred knowledge, and that they take in an unbroken chain of narration, tradition from teacher to teacher all the way back to the Prophet.
فإنهم بذهابهم إلى طلب العلم وإلى حلقات العلم النوراني الشريف هذا هم يمشون ويسلكون في سبيل السعادة الحقيقية التي هي العلم والعبادة، وذهابهم في طريقهم إلى العلم النافع النبوي المحمدي القرآني هذا هم يسلكون طرق الجنة. هذه هي طرق الجنة في الآخر. سيكتشفون أن الذهاب إلى مجالس العلم هذه والذكر هي كيف طريقهم بعد ذلك في الآخرة إلى الجنة.
We've then said the reality of you going forth and every expenditure that you take and every effort that you make on your traveling and attending these gatherings, these circles of this profound sacred knowledge, that in reality these are channels back to paradise. You are treading the footsteps in an unseen, undisclosed reality, that every footstep that you take towards a gathering of knowledge is ultimately and in its reality a footstep towards Jannah.
عليهم يشكر الله سبحانه وتعالى على توفيقه لهم وطلب العلوم والاستمرار فيها حتى يكشف المولى سبحانه وتعالى لهم عظمة ما هم فيه من طلب علوم النبي محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم وعلوم القرآن والعلوم المتعلقة بذات الله جل جلاله تعالى.
Habib then advised that based upon this premise, we should all be deeply show deep gratitude and really thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for what ultimately is this opportunity to tread the path of sacred knowledge.
العلوم النافعة هذه الدنيا والعمل بها ولو في أدنى الحدود كما قال صاحب منظومة الزبد الإمام محمد بن رسلان الشافعي ولو بالعشر، هذا يقذف بالإنسان إلى درجات الولاية العظمى ودرجات القرب من الله سبحانه وتعالى. فلا طريق للولاية ولا المعرفة بالله ولا المحبة لله إلا بالعلم النافع والعبادة، العلم والذكر، العلم والعبادة لله سبحانه وتعالى الخالص.
He then mentioned also that part of the etiquette, the courtesy of this, showing this gratitude to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, an authentic treading upon the path of seeking sacred knowledge, is to implement that which you learn. So the great author of the Zubad, one of the great classical Shafi'i texts, mentions that to put into practice that which you learn, even were it to be 1/10 of that which you acquire. And upon this basis, this is the reality of nobility with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that not only do we acquire this knowledge with etiquette, but we also practice and put it in. And when these two things come together, sacred knowledge with sincere devotion purely for Allah's sake, this is when a person enters into the spheres of divine love.
ما أوجدنا في هذا الكون ولا خلقنا إلا لنعبده، والعبادة تكون إلا بالعلم، وخلق هذا الكون لأجلنا سبحانه وتعالى وخلقنا من أجله جل جلاله وتعالى.
He then reminded us that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created us only to devote ourselves authentically back to Him. And we can't devote ourselves. There's no meaning to the reality of true worship of Allah unless it's predicated on sound and authentic sacred knowledge. So through culminating these two things, we enter into this reality with Allah.
نسأل الله تعالى أن يوفقنا وإياكم وأن يكون هذا العام ملآنا بالفتوحات وبالخيرات وبالبركات أكثر من العام الماضي وأعظم من العام الماضي بفضل الله وبجوده سبحانه وتعالى.
So the Habib then asked Allah for Quran, asked that Allah grant us all tawfiq and enabling grace and facilitates all of these great openings, particularly in the onset of this blessed and auspicious month, the month of Muharram. This is the opening of the new Hijri year. We ask that in this year that Allah grants us great openings and blessings throughout the remainder of our lives. We also attempt to cultivate our entering into this new year in a state of true gratitude and in happiness and delight.
ونستقبله كذلك بالنوايا الصالحة الحسنة، فننوي أن نعمل في هذا العام الجديد جميع الطاعات ولو مندوبة ونترك جميع المخالفات ولو مكروهة، هكذا ننوي نستقبل هذا العام.
We also endeavor to come into the new year by making an abundance of righteous intentions, that we resolve to fulfill all of those obligatory acts and that which has been made an obligatory upon us, and all of the sunnah that we're able to do so, and those things which are recommended for us to do. We make an active, heartfelt intention at the beginning of this year to perform all of these.
العرشية القرآنية التي فتح بها على المخلصين في طلب العلوم النافعة.
We've then made a special dua that Allah literally opens up to you in the greatest manifestation of spiritual opening, and you could say a throne-like opening, which is a deep spiritual reality that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala opens up these unseen realities, spiritual gifts to us.
وأسبابا لهداية هذه الأمة ولسعادتها بمحبتها وارتباطها برسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم.
Al-Ḥabīb made dua that all of this that we acquire, this knowledge that we go and seek, that it becomes a means to enter happiness into the blessed heart of the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam.
صلى الفاتحة ورحمة الله.
جزاكم الله خير سيدنا وحبيبنا أخي كاظم. جزاكم الله خير سيدنا. نشكركم سيدي لعنايتكم إلينا دائما في الغرب. Alhamdulillah, we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to bless and reward Habib Kāẓim and Sheikh Mus'ab for his translation for this beautiful gathering. And inshallah, this was the last of the educational imperative sessions. We pray that all of them were of benefit and of barakah, and that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala illuminates us by virtue of the remembrance of these great individuals, through great individuals. And by virtue of them, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala makes us great. Inshallah, this is probably the beginning of now a series of great moments of learning that will be taking place. You have the trodden path. There is the Gnosis seminar that will be taking place. There will be the educational conference that will be taking place. There will be the speeches and lessons that Habib will be delivering in different cities. So do prepare yourselves, inshallah, to make the most of these gatherings. And what I would really urge everybody to do is to at least attend, if all else fails, to at least attend one of the gatherings with the shuyukh, especially Habib Kāẓim, hafidhahullah, and attain his gaze and being in his presence, and to be able to gaze upon the likes of him. Inshallah, may Allah make it a means of great openings for us and great blessings for us. Ameen ya Rabbil Alameen. Wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. Jazakum Allah khair. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.